In the late 1970s, Venezuela looked untouchable. Luxury cars lined the streets of Caracas. Imported scotch filled private clubs. The national currency was so strong it was treated like a regional reserve. Oil money flowed endlessly, and with it came a deep, dangerous confidence. This was a country that believed it had escaped economic gravity. Today, that same nation is nearly unrecognizable. Entire industries have vanished. Millions have fled. The currency has been stripped of its value so many times it no longer resembles money at all. And this collapse didn't come from bombs, invasions, or civil war. It came quietly from inside the system. So how does a country go from invincible to uninhabitable without a single shot being fired? Because the real story isn't Venezuela. It's why this keeps happening, again and again. When people in the West talk about Venezuela, they usually reach for a single, comforting explanation. They call it just socialism, a failed ideology, a Latin American exception, something tragic but distant, and most importantly, something that could never happen here. That label feels reassuring because it closes the case. If Venezuela collapsed because of bad ideas or corrupt leaders, then stronger institutions and smarter policymakers should keep everyone else safe. The United States has independent central banks. Europe has safeguards. Modern economies are diversified. End of story. But that explanation is dangerously incomplete. History shows that economic collapses rarely follow ideological boundaries. They follow incentives, they follow political pressure, and they follow math. Countries with wildly different political systems have all reached the same breaking point when governments promised more than their economies could support. Focusing on ideology misses the real mechanism at work. Venezuela didn't collapse because of a belief system. It collapsed because the system itself was slowly reprogrammed to avoid short-term pain at all costs. And once that switch is flipped, the outcome becomes predictable. The collapse followed a formula, and formulas travel. Every modern economy runs on a delicate separation of power. Elected governments decide how money gets spent. Central banks decide how money gets created. One asks for funding. The other is supposed to say no. That separation is not a technical detail. It's the only thing standing between a functioning currency and a printing press with no off switch. When politicians want to spend more than they collect, the central bank's job is to make that choice painful by raising interest rates. Higher rates force trade-offs. They slow borrowing. They impose discipline. But that independence is far more fragile than most people realize. Fiscal dominance begins when the government becomes too large, too indebted, and too politically constrained to accept those trade-offs. At that point, higher rates stop being a policy tool and start looking like a threat. Not to voters, but to the government's own survival. That's when pressure replaces principle. The central bank's mission quietly shifts. Fighting inflation becomes secondary to keeping the government solvent. The firewall between spending and printing doesn't explode, it erodes. And once that line is crossed, the outcome becomes math, not politics. Venezuela didn't collapse during a crisis. It collapsed after a boom. When oil prices surged, money flooded in faster than the system could absorb it. For a while, every weakness was hidden behind revenue. Inefficiency looked like generosity. Debt looked manageable. Risk felt theoretical. That flood of cash changed political behavior. The state expanded rapidly. Public payrolls grew. Subsidies multiplied. Energy, food, housing, everything became cheaper, not because it was efficient, but because oil paid the bill. Each new benefit created a new voting bloc. Each promise became politically untouchable. The danger of booms is not excess, it's amnesia. Leaders stop preparing for bad years because good years feel permanent. Budgets are built on peak revenue, not realistic assumptions. And once spending rises, cutting it becomes radioactive. Over time, the economy becomes dependent on a single engine, while the political system becomes addicted to expansion. Saying no stops being an option. Growth becomes expected, entitlements become rights, and the moment discipline disappears, the trap is already set. Then the revenue vanished, but the promises didn't. When the money stops coming in, governments face a choice. Admit the party is over, or pretend it isn't. Cutting spending angers voters. Raising taxes sparks backlash. Both carry immediate political consequences. Printing money doesn't. At first it feels painless. Salaries still get paid. Benefits still arrive. Markets don't crash overnight. On paper, the crisis appears solved. But the solution is an illusion, because the new money isn't backed by productivity. It's backed by hope. This is how currency decay begins, not with panic, but with relief. Prices creep higher, then accelerate. Yet asset markets tell a different story. Stocks rise, property values surge. Anyone holding hard assets feels richer, even as purchasing power quietly erodes. That contrast is critical. It delays resistance. People assume the system still works because balances go up, not realizing what those balances can actually buy is shrinking. Inflation doesn't announce itself as a disaster. It disguises itself as growth. By the time the average citizen understands what's happening, the damage is already embedded. By the time people noticed, escape was already closing. What makes Venezuela relevant isn't how extreme the collapse became. It's how familiar the early stages look today. Across the United States and much of the West, governments are running deficits once reserved for wars or deep recessions during relative economic calm. Debt is no longer growing slowly. It's accelerating. Trillions are added not over decades, but over months. And the most revealing shift isn't the size of the debt, it's the cost of carrying it. Interest payments have quietly become one of the largest items in national budgets, crowding out everything else. This creates a trap. Higher interest rates are supposed to fight inflation, but higher rates also make government debt more expensive. At a certain scale, fighting inflation starts to threaten the government's ability to function at all. That's when pressure builds behind closed doors. Central banks may speak the language of independence, but they operate inside political reality. When tightening risks destabilizing the state itself, restraint becomes impossible. This is how fiscal dominance spreads, not through collapse, but through necessity. When rate hikes threaten the government itself, independence ends. When inflation becomes impossible to ignore, governments face another choice: admit the money has been debased or change the story. Blaming abstract forces like supply chains or global shocks only goes so far. Eventually, a villain is needed. That's when inflation stops being described as a monetary problem and starts being framed as a moral one. Prices aren't rising because too much money exists. They're rising because someone is being greedy. Corporations, landlords, speculators, middlemen. The language shifts from economics to ethics. This isn't new. The same narrative has appeared in country after country, decade after decade. From Weimar Germany to Latin America to post-war Europe, leaders have repeatedly claimed that inflation wasn't caused by policy, but by bad actors exploiting the system. The appeal is obvious. If prices are immoral rather than mathematical, then politicians become protectors instead of participants. Responsibility dissolves. Public anger gets redirected. But this rhetorical shift always leads to the same place. Once prices are framed as an injustice, controlling them feels not only reasonable, but necessary. And that's when governments reach for controls. Price controls are often introduced as an emergency measure, a temporary fix to protect the public. On the surface, they look compassionate. If prices are too high, force them lower. Problem solved. But economics doesn't respond to orders. It responds to incentives. When a government sets prices below the cost of production, it doesn't make goods cheaper. It makes them unprofitable. Farmers don't produce at a loss. Factories don't run for charity. When selling becomes illegal or unsustainable, production simply stops. That's how shortages begin. Not because resources vanish, but because making those resources available no longer makes sense. Shelves empty, quality drops, variety disappears. What remains is rationing and frustration. Demand doesn't disappear just because supply does, it relocates. As official markets collapse, informal ones take their place. Goods still exist, but only through personal connections, cash deals, and inflated prices. Risk replaces efficiency. Price controls don't eliminate high prices. They hide them briefly before unleashing something worse. When legal markets die, shadow markets take over. When price controls fail, governments usually move to the next lever: currency control. The goal sounds patriotic: stop money from leaving, protect the national currency, defend sovereignty. The method is deceptively simple. The state declares an official exchange rate, an artificial price for foreign currency, while banning free trade. On paper, the currency looks strong. In reality, it splits in two. One rate exists for the public, another exists in the shadows, and the gap between them becomes a machine for instant wealth extraction. Insiders with political access can buy dollars cheaply at the official rate, then resell them at the real market rate for massive profits without producing anything. This is arbitrage, and it rewards proximity to power, not productivity. While elites multiply wealth overnight, legitimate businesses suffocate. Importers can't access currency. Manufacturers can't buy inputs. Production stalls, not because demand is gone, but because money itself has become dishonest. Currency controls are sold as a way to keep wealth inside the country. In practice, they do the opposite. They ensure only the connected can escape. This doesn't stop capital flight, it guarantees it. Inflation is often described as a tax on everyone, but that's misleading. It doesn't hit all groups equally. In reality, inflation is a precision weapon aimed at the middle. The wealthy tend to hold assets that rise with inflation: real estate, stocks, businesses, foreign currency. They adjust. The very poor, while suffering, often rely on direct support that gets adjusted or replaced. The middle class has neither shield. They hold savings in cash. They trust pensions. They believe long-term planning will be rewarded. That trust is what inflation destroys. Years of disciplined saving can be erased in months. Retirement plans that once promised security become symbolic. Fixed incomes collapse while prices accelerate. Nothing is seized directly, yet everything is taken. This is the silent default. The government reduces its real obligations by quietly reducing the value of what it owes. What's lost isn't just money, it's confidence in the system itself. When effort no longer leads to stability, people stop investing, stop planning, and stop resisting. And once people are broke, control becomes easier. Once money no longer works, governments have to find another way to maintain order. They can't restore value, so they manage scarcity. That's when welfare quietly changes function. It stops being a safety net and starts becoming a lever. Assistance that was once universal becomes conditional. Benefits are no longer just distributed, they're verified. Identity gets linked to access. To receive support, citizens must register, comply, and remain visible to the system that provides it. On the surface, this looks like modernization, digitization, efficiency. In practice, it reshapes the relationship between the individual and the state. Food, fuel, housing assistance, these stop being rights and become permissions. When resources are scarce, the ability to delay, deny, or prioritize becomes power. This shift doesn't require overt force. People adjust behavior naturally when survival depends on approval. Compliance replaces consent, not through ideology, but through necessity. Venezuela didn't invent this model, it refined it under pressure. And once it proved effective, it stopped being exceptional. And now the West is building the same infrastructure. Central banks now say the next step in modern money is digital currency. Central bank digital currencies, or CBDCs, are described as faster, safer, and more efficient. Officials emphasize convenience, financial inclusion, and better payment systems. On paper, it sounds like a technical upgrade, but the discussion doesn't stop at what CBDCs are meant to do. It extends to what the technology allows. Unlike cash, digital money can be programmed. Rules can be attached. Conditions can be enforced automatically. Supporters argue this could help target stimulus more effectively or prevent fraud. Critics point out that the same tools could limit how money is used, where it's spent, or how long it remains valid. To be clear, this doesn't mean these controls will happen, it means they could. And history shows that tools built for emergencies rarely stay limited to them. In systems already strained by debt and inflation, flexibility becomes temptation. When policymakers run out of options, control starts to look like stability. The danger isn't the technology itself, it's the incentives surrounding it. When exits disappear, panic follows. When confidence in money breaks, people look for exits. They move into hard assets, foreign currency, anything that can't be diluted. For governments trapped by debt, those exits become a threat. That's when capital controls appear, rarely announced as such. They arrive as regulations, reporting requirements, and temporary restrictions meant to preserve stability. Moving money becomes harder. Protecting wealth becomes suspicious. What was once prudence gets reframed as hoarding. History shows this isn't hypothetical. In 1933, during a severe debt and banking crisis, the United States government didn't choose austerity, it chose control. Executive Order 6102 made private gold ownership illegal. Citizens were forced to surrender gold in exchange for paper currency, which was later devalued. Wealth wasn't taken by force, it was taken by law. The lesson is uncomfortable but consistent. When a government's obligations exceed its resources, protecting the system takes priority over protecting property rights. Rules adjust to necessity. Modern systems don't require soldiers or raids. They rely on compliance, penalties, and restricted access. This isn't theory, it's precedent. Venezuela isn't an outlier, it's a warning. Not because every country will collapse the same way, but because the direction is often identical, even when the speed is not. Some nations fall fast, others drift, but the mechanisms remain consistent. What makes this dangerous is that collapse doesn't feel like collapse while it's happening. It feels like policy, like protection, like temporary measures taken in the name of stability. Each step seems reasonable on its own. Together, they quietly reshape the system. By the time the damage becomes obvious, it no longer looks like a crisis. It looks normal. The Venezuela playbook didn't fail because it was crude. It worked because it was gradual. And that's the real lesson. The collapse doesn't announce itself, it normalizes. In the next video, we'll examine a moment when this playbook was used closer to home, when protecting the system meant seizing real money itself.